People ask me questions, I'll answer anything. I don't know, I've always felt like this. I've always felt like, if you be honest and call it like it is, then there's less to keep track of.
We found bones of dinosaurs and everything else, but we haven't found bones that I've heard of Bigfoot.
Despite the fact I don't even know the rules of it and couldn't begin to describe it even in a general way.
It's a little mustache.
Oh yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
All right, go Cougs.
Well, obviously, it is a heartbreaking day across the college football world. Mike Leach, a larger than life figure, is being mourned and celebrated by those who knew him and by thousands and thousands of people who didn't know him, but who loved him. I'm happy to be able to celebrate his life and share this with a couple of people who knew him very well. Bruce Feldman, who wrote his biography, Swing Your Sword, and Yogi Roth, who got to cover Mike Leach and goes way back with him as well. So, gentlemen, I think the thing that's been fun for me this morning that has added some levity to an otherwise really sad, heartbreaking day is revisiting and hearing and watching and thinking about all of the different stories and moments with Mike Leach that just brought a smile to my face. So we'll start with Bruce, with you, just your reaction when you heard the news. And then as we were talking about sort of the finality of what this means and his impact, not just on football, but on everything bigger.
It's twofold. Like the first time I'd heard he was hospitalized, I don't really think I had grasped it until a couple hours later. I talked to somebody who was really connected with the situation, who really explained to me how dire it was at that point. And that was sinking in, and that was a hard one. And then yesterday, just hearing where it was at that point, and I was pretty gutted by it. And so my co-host for the Audible, the podcast I do with Stu Mandel, we taped something last night, and I was kind of a mess in terms of just rambling all over the place. I was struggling to process it. I'm still struggling to process it, just because my relationship with Mike was expanded over a long time, and it's complicated for a variety of reasons. But one of the reasons why is just because I know I've met so many people through Mike, and those people I'm really close to. And then, Mike and I went back and glanced at a text, or what really our last kind of, substantive text exchange. And I had sent him something after Dave Nickel had passed away, his protege who was on the USC staff. And that was a tragedy. Dave was only 45, and I was close to Dave, and Mike and I connected over that. And then Mike sent me some, text that I thought was really, it kind of touched me as I read it. But in there was the line, "We got to hang out more." And that's hard, because I just thought, and you hear this a lot when somebody passes away, there was going to be time later. And I was like, oh yeah, I'll see him in the off season. I was like, he was in Starkville for 3 years, and the first two were kind of the pandemic years, especially the first year. And there really wasn't much time to run into anybody at that point. And then this year we were running around on the road a lot, and I was like, all right, I'll see him at some point this off season, not thinking that there wouldn't be it. And that's just, it's life, I guess, and so I wrote about him this morning. I got up really early, and I kind of wrote about my relationship with Mike, and there's so many people, obviously Lincoln Riley is at the top of the list because he is so high profile, and because Caleb just won the Heisman and what he's done at USC. But it's countless. You can't put in a tweet, you can't put in a story just how many people whose coaching careers Mike Leach has impacted, dramatically changed, or really made. And when you talk to them, and I've talked to a few of them in the last couple of days, they're like, I owe everything to Mike Leach. And these are guys at some point maybe had a little friction with Mike after they left, because Mike wasn't at the biggest schools. He was at, solid Power 5 programs, but they go on to bigger places. And I think that's hard, or they go on for their own opportunity. I think that was hard for Mike to kind of deal with. And in my case, the more I thought about it, I was like, I owe a big part of my career to Mike, because, he trusted me when he asked me to write his book. And I learned so much, not just about football, but a lot about football, but also about a lot of other things. And I know, everybody here, I know you guys each have very probably unique personal stories that you had with Mike, because that's how he was. And of all the gifts, I think that was one of his greatest gifts, was like he had this quality where he was genuinely curious about people. And you don't really see that, I feel like, in a lot of highly successful coaches, because they're so focused on what they're doing. They don't have time or the inclination to be like, hey, what's the deal here? You know, like, I'm sure whatever Yogi's next door neighbor does, or Ashley, whatever, you know, your cousin might do, if they happen to meet Mike Leach would find out something significant about them, and he would be genuinely curious to talk to them for 20 minutes. And you're like, all right, we got to go, you know, kind of thing.
So true. So true, Ash. I can't help but think, like, over the last probably month, I have thought, like, I got to call Coach Leach. I'm going to call Coach Leach. And it's like, well, do I have like 90 minutes to go call Coach Leach? And when I saw the news break that he was ill, instantly I'll text, Coach, you got to pull through. We need a good catch up. And then to Bruce's point, like, nobody really knew how dire it was, or you didn't want to believe how dire it was. I know that's where like my head went. And then to wake up and see that he had passed away, it was that cliche moment of like, man, make that time for whomever it is you want to catch up with. And as the day has gone on, whether I'm looking at like my coffee cup, I laugh and think about Mike Leach walking onto a field, because he always had like his cup of tea or whatever it was as he was walking. Or I think about this past summer, I went to Key West and he sent me down, like he might as well have been like Condé Nast, like giving me like the whole list of places to go, the bars to see, the restaurants to visit, the pictures to take. But every time we would talk throughout our entire relationship, like it was never during the course of time where the sun was out. Like it was always midnight to 2 a.m. And it would be a 90-minute, a 2-hour talk. And honestly, you two can probably relate, it was never, very rarely was it about football. Even if I was calling a game and it was our production meeting, we would never talk about football. Like that, yeah, this guy might play, this guy might play. But it was more about politics, food, travel, all about conversation. I think that's the biggest thing when I like try to zoom out on Mike Leach's impact on myself personally and others. As Bruce, you just said, he was about conversation, whether you agreed or not. He wanted the conversation, and it was always polite. It was funny. It was witty. And you walked away saying like, can't wait to go have another one with him. And I think we've all had them in so many unique places and different forums that just seem probably unorthodox for most head coaches. But for Mike Leach, it was like, yeah, of course you're going to talk to him in this setting when he's teaching a class or in a bar or, you know, walking the street randomly, Ashley, as you and he did in his time at Washington State. So many things I think come through, but the one above all is that this guy, he was about learning and seeking and the curiosity that Bruce referenced, and he loved doing it all through so many different forms of conversation.
Yeah, that is beautifully said by both of you. And I think, you know, when I think about Mike Leach, he was never on time to anything, right? Like no matter whether it was a production call or a meeting or, I mean, it didn't matter. He was never on time, but that was sort of like, it was Mike Leach. I remember I've been looking at some different pictures and clips on my phone. And from Media Day, there's a great shot that I got of him walking up to, you guys know, like 8 a.m. on Pac-12 football media day. It's all the coaches, all 24 student athletes. You take a picture, you are there on time, because if you're not there on time, then the rest of the day is shot. And Mike was nowhere to be found. And he shows up, I think it was like maybe 7 or 8 minutes late, and just everyone breaks into applause. Like that whole, you know, and he goes and he stands next to Justin Wilcox and everyone's just smiling and laughing because it was Leach. And he was his own person. He was an absolute original. And I think the thing that is so interesting about him, and Bruce, I think you can speak to this well, is that he had the most unorthodox path to get to where he got to as a major, an SEC football coach. When you think about the fact that he, you know, grew up in Cody, Wyoming, went to BYU, same time as Kyle Whittingham, went to Pepperdine Law School. And so Bruce, from how well you got to know him and understand his path, like how did he become who he was and the influence that he had on the game of football, I think is something that can't be overstated.
Yeah. And it's hard, like, you know, we did this book and there's so much, I don't want to say so much I've forgotten, but there's so many layers to it. Like this was Mike. So Pretty much, and I'm glad you mentioned Kyle Whittingham. By the way, Mike Leach revered Kyle Whittingham. Like that was a man to him. That was like, I'm imagining like Kyle Whittingham was like the toughest man in college football in Mike's eyes, right? He just had such admiration for him. But Mike was not like a great athlete. Like most college head coaches, they were at least pretty good football players in the high school they went to, right? You know, at the very least, they may not have certainly been Kyle Whittingham or Jim Harbaugh, or certainly not Deion Sanders, but they were like, Lincoln, was like for a minute was on the Texas Tech, team, but at least I'm sure in high school he was really good, right? And whoever it was, you go down the list. I've had conversations with Ryan Day's father-in-law, who's a really good basketball coach, and Chip Kelly's from the same area, and we talk about Chip's athleticism. He was still like a three-sport athlete. He may not have been a great college football player at New Hampshire, but he was still something. Well, Mike wasn't even really that. But so he's coaching a little league baseball team. I think he's 17 years old, and Mike's told me this story where like the region, not just like for like 5 states, they were having this tournament in Cody, where he was from, Cody, Wyoming. And he was like, we didn't even belong in there, because the only reason why we didn't win our way in there. It was just because we were hosting it. And so he was like, we had no business in the tournament. But so what he came up with, this wacky thing, was he called it ghost infield, where he was pretending like they were all taking infield, and he had an imaginary bat and imaginary ball, and all these kids in his team were like diving in the hole and doing all this crazy stuff, only there was no ball, and everybody was like, what the heck are these kids doing? And he actually got them to play well, and it was so nutty, and it was like just a lot of Mike's different ways of doing things started at that age. And I think what really resonated for him was, yeah, I could be a lawyer, and I probably would be a really good one. And I have no doubt, knowing how he thinks, that he'd probably be a great lawyer, because he was incredibly stubborn and he's incredibly smart. And those are really good traits. And sometimes the stubborn part trips up people. And I'm not just talking football coaches, right? I think sometimes Mike had issues with that, certainly too. But we once talked in the book about ego. And ego is kind of associated as not a great term, right? And like, think about what we're doing for a living, where it's like sometimes you hear these less than flattering descriptions about talent on TV, but it takes ego to have the confidence to be on TV, right? I mean, if you don't have it, the viewer and your producers will probably see through it, right? And so Mike was explaining to me, like, you need ego, because when it's 3rd and 13, you have to be the one who's like, this play is going to work, and this is why. And if they don't believe it, it's not going to work. And I'm going to be the one who can lead this program out of the ditch, and all these things. And so Mike kind of got it. And in that regard, and he's fortunate, because Sharon, his wife, who was a saint and was the most supportive person on the face of the earth, back when he was at smaller schools, whether it was, like at Iowa Wesleyan or Valdosta, or certainly before that, she was the one really supporting the family, because she was making more money than he was when she was working in the football office or working at the school at the university. And so I think it helped that she was able, that they were able to ride out some really low paying jobs, where he had like 5 different jobs at Iowa Wesleyan or Valdosta or these other places, the College of the Desert, wherever, like all these places that he was before he really got to Kentucky as Hal Mummy's OC, before it took off. And I think all that perspective really shaped him. And to his credit, he and Hal Mummy on their bar napkins took a lot of the stuff from Lavelle Edwards, the great BYU coach, and pieced together a bunch of things and tweaked it. And they, like, you can talk to Sonny Dykes, who we all know Sonny, and Sonny will give you a really detailed, smart explanation of what the air raid is in terms of as a mentality, more as than stuff that gets drawn up on a bar napkin or is in a game plan. And I think all of this is like kind of a remarkable journey that he had, and so many people were impacted by him.
Yeah, you know what's interesting when you say like so many people are impacted by him? We've all talked to so many coaches that are like, I wish I could do it how Mike did it, right? We all know we'd get the calls in the middle of the night, but he wouldn't get to the office sometimes till middle of the afternoon, right? It would be recruiting weekends or summer camps, and he'd be in Key West, or
He
he
didn't
just
want to
had this,
recruit. He did
yeah,
not want to recruit.
yeah, he had this different methodology. I could hear and see so many head coaches saying, man, like maybe he's got it figured out. Because, you know, to your point of ego or even like what the job takes or we think it takes or what head coaches think it takes, like Mike did what he thought that it took. And you can't argue the results. And I think that that is something that I hope a lot of coaches take away is that you don't have to like mimic everybody else. You could, you know, coach to the beat of your own drum. And clearly that was Mike Leach. And I just think his approach to that was refreshing to a degree as well. And I think coaches now, especially here we are in this crazy era of college football, I think they'll look back to him and be like, yeah, like he had it nailed. Like he never seemed dramatically burnt out. Like he just seemed like he was having a great time and riding that wave of coaching that kind of swept up him and this magnificent career that he had. And I just chuckle, like laugh thinking about all these coaches saying, man, like we got it all wrong. Like Leach had it figured out.
Yeah,
Well,
Yogi, to
the
that
crazy,
point. Oh yeah, go ahead, Bruce.
no, the crazy thing with it is, like, I've talked to coaches who are polar opposite of Leach, and in terms of how they're wired. And one of them in particular told this story recently of they brought Leach in to kind of try to talk to him about some of his concepts and everything. And this coach is super wound tight. And he said, I'm listening to this. And it's like, we're trying to talk to him about his red zone, what he likes in the red zone. And the way this coach is describing, I'm imagining it was like that scene from Good Will Hunting where Ben Affleck is in like the room and he's trying to pretend like he's somebody there's not. And they're pulling their hair out. There's like, what do we have? What do we invite onto this campus? Like, who is this lunatic with these generalities? And I think there was only one Mike Leach. Look, Cliff Kingsbury and Dana and Sonny and a bunch of these other guys, and certainly Lincoln, they have taken parts of what they can take. And I think the other things is like, we can't, Mike kept his offense pretty much, as pure as he could. And then the other guys have either gotten way far away or they've taken small elements to work with it. And they've made it work as best they can. And I think that the tricky part, and Yogi, this well, like when all these Pete Carroll guys, left Pete, they tried to be Pete. And it's hard. It's like trying to, like, he was a comet, like it's hard to replicate that.
That is perfectly said. And I just to put a bow on that thought, and we can wrap after this. I want to get one more thought from you, Bruce. But I was looking back at a transcript from an interview that we did with Troy Taylor when he became the Utah offensive coordinator back in 2017, obviously with the news that he took over as Stanford's head coach this weekend. And one of the sound bites that I was looking at was he was talking about people that have influenced him. And he was talking about Chris Peterson and all these different, he said, but one of the guys I always really watched was Mike Leach. And he said this, he said, when you explore different things, it does something good for your brain, because as human beings, we tend to walk in ruts. It's the same thing in business or football. If you see the same thing being done over and over again, most people follow that. So I always had an admiration for people who challenge status quo and try different things, because it takes a lot of courage, because if you fail, you look like an idiot. And I feel like that was just the perfect quote to sort of sum up what I always really appreciated about Mike Leach, was that he did it his own way. And he was so unafraid about what other people thought about him or what, kind of the public persona was going to be. He was who he was. And I think in the world that we live in, so many of us are worried about what other people think. And Mike Leach didn't give a crap about any of that. But Bruce, I just wanted to circle back on one last thing. And I really appreciate your time. And these stories have been awesome. You talked about his wife, Sharon. I think the aspect of Mike Leach that never really felt public, because so much was who he was sort of as a husband and a father, like that part of his life. They had, he and Sharon had 4 kids. I know they have several grandkids. Did you get a window into that aspect of Mike Leach when you were writing his book?
Yeah, they would always go to Key West. So his oldest daughter, Janine, is a doctor. I think her husband's a doctor as well. And they were especially close. And I think with Sharon, she was, they met at BYU, and like you see coaches' wives, and it is a tough existence, right? Because most times, Yogi's was not kidding when he was like, Mike would maybe leave the house at 12 or 1, and they'd be there, at least the offensive staff. It was like two different staffs. The defensive staff was like kind of the day crew, and the offensive staff with Leach was like the vampire crew, and they'd be there maybe till 3 a.m, right? And so I think it takes an incredibly supportive, loving companion to stay with that and to support that. And with Mike, especially, there was that 2 years. Look, credit to Bill Moose, because he was the one who was like, you know what, I'm going to take a chance on that guy, because nobody else after Texas Tech, that was messy. And they brought him to Pullman, and as you guys know, they were struggling. I think they won 9 games the previous 4 years, and Mike went there. But in the time in between, yeah, they were living in Key West and they had a nice house. But I think, I can only imagine the roller coaster ride she was on, because I felt like when we worked on that book for whatever it was, 2 years, I felt like I was on the roller coaster ride with him, because like Yogi wasn't kidding. 90 minutes on the phone, like I'm thinking, we all live on the West Coast. You need to go to bed, Mike. Like, I need to go to bed. It's 2 a.m. my time. Let me get off the phone. And I think she, whatever you believe, whenever, Sharon is like, they're going to be like, oh, you were married to Mike? Come on in, because she just was incredibly supportive. And I think Mike, really appreciated that. I think it's tough when you have those coaches hours, but in a lot of ways, like the air raid kind of family of all these guys, and we know a bunch of them now who are at USC, and they're scattered all over the place, right? But I think that they were so much connected with that, and I think that's why so many of them are really hurting, obviously personally, but they're really hurting for Sharon, because they bought this place by the lake down there and get to spend time with the grandkids, and I think from everything I know, they were really looking forward to that. I don't think Mike was going to coach that much longer, and that's what's really bittersweet about this, and I think they're a really close family, and the kids are now adults and have some of their own kids. But I think that's the part that's really bittersweet, is that we all got to, kind of experience this wild roller coaster ride of this incredibly unique individual, who, it wasn't all great. We all know that, but like, in, everything of it. And look, I mean, I'm glad that for his, that they went out, won the Egg Bowl and went out on a winning game. But like, that part is bittersweet, that they didn't get enough time to spend together, at their lake house with their grandkids.
Yeah, I think, Bruce, you hit it on the head at the beginning of this when you talk about, you always think there's going to be more time. And it is that stark reminder that none of us know how much time we get. And I personally feel really lucky that I was able to overlap, several years of my career with Mike Leach in the Pac-12. We both came into the Pac-12 the same year. And I'd say my media day memories with him, like whether it was the, twirling him around before he took down a piñata, or talking about rollerblading, or going for a walk with him through, cornfields in Pullman, or, I mean, just eating ice cream until I felt like I was going to throw up at Ferdinand's, like whatever it was. If you were with Mike Leach, you were laughing.
Or walking through the graveyard, or whatever that place was.
Yes. That was when we did that walk. We stopped by the graveyard, and it was, I mean, that was again, like a 30-minute detour. And I'm looking at my phone and going, Bill Stevens. I mean, any SID who's worked with Mike Leach knows that trying to corral Mike Leach is a task that you will never be able to fully complete. But I remember being worried we were going to be so late, because it was just one thing after the next. But Yogi, before we wrap this up, any final thought from you, a memory that stands out, or just something about Mike that you're always going to remember?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, there's so many. As Bruce and you were talking, I'm like thinking and jotting down little notes. I can remember sitting in a staff meeting, and it was, of course, after practice, so call it like 6 or 7. And I remember a lot of the coaches looked at me and said, don't say a word. Do not say a word, because this tangent's going to go on. We're trying to get home. Like every time he'd ask me a question, they'd be like, yep, Yep. Hey, nothing, because they wanted to get home. But I'll say this: I would host and still do a lot of the Washington State Cougar Athletic Fund fundraisers. So it's February, you go up to Seattle, and he of course is the star of the show. And it was so fun being on stage and not only conversing, but watching his stardom, because it was much different than doing it for any other coach that I think any of us have been around, because he was so easily engaged. He would talk to anyone, any faithful alumni, any kid, any grandparent, any human being. He was just kind of hanging and just kicking it. And that was him. I mean, all of those memories keep flooding back to me. And even every interview, Ash, we'd be on a set and we'd do signing day. And it was kind of the laughing, like, it was like a little joke. Like, I'm going to ask about a player, and then he's going to ask me about my next trip. And then we're going to talk about traveling for the entirety of the 6-minute segment. And then we're going to say goodbye. And it's going to be a joke in between somewhere. And that's going to be the conversation. It was like, you didn't have to prepare for Washington State players because you weren't going to talk about it anyway.
Right.
So I don't know.
Can I throw one quick thing off of what Yogi just said? So this is one of my favorite memories of Leach. We're working on the book. I'm in Lubbock, and out at practice in the first couple of periods, he's running practice, and the guy standing next to him is in his mid-50s, kind of like kind of really sloppy dressed. And I asked one of the Texas Tech staffers, I was like, "Is that a big booster?" He goes, "No, I think that's a homeless guy who was out by the building. Leach brought him out to practice, and he's just talking to him." And I was like, what head coach? I could never imagine Nick Saban bringing a homeless man out to practice, like, "All right, we do this here, we do that." Like, that was Mike.
Yeah.
That is the perfect story to end this on. And I will say, Yogi, you sent a picture over today that I think encompasses, like, it's the perfect image of Mike Leach. It was when we were all out there for the Washington State Utah game, and Washington State had just beat Utah. I think it was 2018. And we've got Gardner Minshew on the set, and it's you and me and Evan Moore. And we're all, looking at the bright lights, like being all serious about to come on and do this segment. And Mike Leach is sitting in the middle, and he just has this look where he's looking at whoever's taking the picture, just like right at them, like, this is all. And it brought such a smile to my face, because I thought that captured him perfectly. So yeah, there will never be another like Mike Leach. And I just want to say, Bruce, thanks for being generous with your time. I'm sure you've got a lot going on today, and Yogi, I know you do as well, but this truly was cathartic and filled my heart to be able to share some of these memories. And I know it will for a lot of people as well. So if you're watching this online, I would just ask you to drop your favorite Mike Leach memory or quote below, because I think the more we share, the better we will be able to keep his memory alive. But thanks to you both.